A quiet neighborhood flips from calm to chaos. It always starts that way, with a place that feels safe enough for people to stop paying attention. The streetlights glow like soft markers along the road. Porches carry the warm spill of indoor lamps, and the hum of daily life settles into the kind of silence people trust without thinking. This neighborhood was one of those pockets where the air seemed to slow down at dusk. Dogs barked in predictable rhythms. Kids rode scooters until parents called them in for dinner. The sidewalks carried the same familiar footsteps every night. You could look out a window and know exactly who was passing by and at what time. It was routine, steady, almost boring, and nobody ever questioned that comfort. But comfort is what blinds people the fastest. It teaches them to tune out anything that doesn't match the usual pattern. They stop checking over their shoulders. They stop noticing the car they have never seen before idling half a block away. They stop asking why two silhouettes stand just out of reach of the nearest porch light. When you live in a place that feels safe for too long, danger does not need to hide. It only needs to stand still until you look away. That night, the neighborhood carried the same quiet rhythm it always did. A light breeze pushed through the trees and brushed across the old wooden fences that separated one yard from the next. A lawn sprinkler clicked in slow, steady arcs. A cat crossed the street without urgency. Anyone watching would have said nothing unusual was happening. And that was exactly why the shift felt so sudden. Chaos has a way of slipping into the calmest spaces without warning, and when it arrives, it does not blend in. It rips the moment apart. It began with a single sound, so sharp and fast that the neighbors couldn't agree later on what it was. Some said it was a gasp. Others thought it was a muffled cry. Someone insisted it was the scrape of shoes against concrete. No one was certain, because no one was paying attention until the calm cracked open. The woman walking down the sidewalk had her keys in hand, her bag over her shoulder, and her mind somewhere else. A shopping list. A voicemail she needed to return. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should have been interrupted. The two men who stepped out from the edge of the walkway did not belong there. They didn't fit the picture of this street, and that is what made their presence feel like a sudden tear in the fabric of the evening. They moved with purpose, not hesitation. They had watched her approach, waited for the gap between houses where no porch light reached, and closed in before she understood what was happening. Calm has no defense against intention. It only knows how to break. When the first hand shot out and grabbed her by the throat, the quiet of the neighborhood collapsed in an instant. The kind of breath you hold when walking through a dark corner turns into the kind of breath you lose before you can scream. Her keys fell and bounced against the sidewalk. The metallic clatter cut through the air sharper than the sound that came before it. That sound, at least, someone heard clearly. A neighbor sitting behind a window paused, unsure if it mattered. A couple walking their dog in the next block stopped mid-conversation. The calm was gone now, stripped away by a moment that didn't make sense. What made the chaos even more jarring was how fast it grew. The woman struggled, the men tightened their grip, and the neighborhood's stillness shifted into a pulse of fear. A street that had felt predictable seconds earlier now carried a threat heavy enough to vibrate through the air. Every shadow looked different. Every quiet corner felt like a trap. The false safety that had wrapped the neighborhood for years peeled back, and the truth settled in. Calm means nothing when danger chooses the moment. It doesn't have to sneak in. It only has to wait. This was the point where the night changed. Not because people understood what was happening, but because the illusion that nothing bad could ever touch this neighborhood finally shattered. The woman's feet scraped against the ground. Her voice caught in her throat, and the two men pulled her into a darker space between the houses. Chaos had arrived, and it didn't need noise to announce itself. It only needed a quiet place to step into and take over. An ambush that targets the wrong woman. It happens faster than anyone expects, because ambushes are built on timing, not strength. The two men had watched her for days. Not her specifically, but the pattern she shared with another woman who lived only 3 houses away. Same walk. Same schedule. Same habit of keeping her phone tucked in her bag instead of her hand. They were looking for someone else, but routine makes people interchangeable when you only study shadows and movement. They had convinced themselves they understood everything they needed, and that confidence was the first mistake they never saw coming. They positioned themselves behind a thick hedge near the bend in the sidewalk, a place where the streetlight flickered just enough to leave a pocket of hazy dimness. Not full darkness, but close enough to hide intent. The hedge had a gap in the middle where a kid once cut through on the way to school, a shortcut worn into the leaves that never filled in. The men used it as a viewing slit. They had parked their car 2 blocks over, walked the long way around, and blended into the shadows with the patience of people who believed nothing would go wrong. They watched her approach. From a distance, she looked exactly like the woman they were after. Same height, similar jacket, same shoulder-length hair pulled back the same way. They didn't question it. They didn't pause to confirm. They were too focused on the plan they had rehearsed in a dozen whispered conversations, the plan that depended on speed. One of them checked the alley behind him to make sure no one else was coming. The other steadied his breathing, counting each inhale like a runner waiting for the starting signal. The woman walked without suspicion. Her stride was relaxed, the kind of walk people have only when they believe their environment has earned their trust. She glanced at a house across the street, admiring a porch light someone had recently replaced with a brighter bulb. She didn't notice the men watching her. She didn't notice anything unusual at all. She moved like someone who had taken this same path for months and never once had reason to worry. As she reached the weak stretch of lighting, the men stepped out in sync. Their shoes barely made a sound because they lifted their feet high and planted them soft. They had practiced that part too. One moved toward her left side, the other toward her right. She sensed motion beside her and turned, expecting maybe a jogger or a late dog walker. Instead, she saw 2 silhouettes closing in with deliberate steps. Her first instinct was confusion, the kind that freezes the mind for a second while it tries to understand what it sees. She didn't know these men. They didn't speak. They didn't ask for anything. They simply acted. One grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back. The movement was sharp enough to knock the balance from her legs. The other reached for her throat with a grip meant to quiet her fast. They had planned to grab their target and drag her into a waiting car. They thought they were following the same script. But the woman they caught did not match the expectations they had built around the woman they wanted. Their target was known to scare easy, known to freeze, known to submit fast when confronted. This woman was different. Not trained, not prepared, but not wired to collapse. The shock didn't fold her. It lit something in her that they weren't ready for. She fought with pure instinct. She twisted her body sideways, slammed her shoulder into one of them, and managed to break his hold long enough to draw in a sharp breath. It wasn't a scream, but it was a sound that carried. The men weren't expecting resistance. Their timing staggered. For a moment, their perfect rhythm broke. One tried to tighten his grip again, while the other reached for her bag, convinced it might contain something they needed. That second mistake cost them more. Their target was supposed to be compliant, quiet, easy to control. Instead, they found themselves struggling to get a firm grasp on a woman who refused to go still. The fight shifted back and forth along the sidewalk. Her shoes scraped. Their hands slipped as they tried to pull her into the shadows between 2 houses. They grew frustrated, and frustration pushed them into reckless moves that clashed with their plan. They needed silence, but every scuffle made more noise. They needed speed, but every second stretched into messy, unpredictable motion. And behind them, only a short distance away, someone else had heard the first struggle, a presence they hadn't accounted for, a presence that was already moving toward them, fast and silent. Drawn by the crack in the calm, they thought they controlled a seal. Here's the struggle before anyone else notices. He was not on duty. He was not in uniform. He was not looking for trouble. He was only taking a late walk after a long day, letting the cool night air clear the noise from his mind. He moved with the steady pace of someone who trained his body to stay efficient even at rest. His breathing was calm, his heartbeat unhurried. The neighborhood felt harmless enough that he let his attention drift, but only to a point. A seal never fully powers down. The instinct to scan, listen, and evaluate never goes quiet. It sits under the surface like a steady current, ready the moment something shifts. He turned the corner near the row of houses when he heard a faint sound that didn't belong. Most people would have dismissed it as a branch bending or a garbage bin shifting. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But he caught the tight edge in it. The quick stop in someone's breath. The friction of shoes not meant to slide like that. It snapped his focus into full clarity. The street looked calm on the surface, but calm means nothing to someone trained to listen past it. He paused for half a second, not to question the sound, but to map it. Distance, direction, intensity. He measured it the same way he had measured noises on deployments where a single misread sound could cost a life. He adjusted his pace and moved toward the source. Not running, not rushing. Swift enough to close the space without drawing attention. His shoulders were steady, posture loose, footsteps placed with precision learned over years of walking through sand, brush, and metal floors without making noise. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he recognized the tone of the sounds ahead. Panic held tight, breath restricted, movement uneven. It was a fight, but not the kind where both sides show up ready. As he approached, the pattern became clearer. Someone was struggling. Someone else was controlling that struggle. The rhythm told him almost everything. The woman's movements were reactive, sudden, driven by instinct. The attackers moved with coordinated intention, but not professional discipline. That slight sloppiness revealed them more than they realized. They were force, not skill. Aggression, not training. He could read it in the uneven cadence of their steps and the blunt way they tried to suppress her noise. He knew he couldn't approach from the front. They would see him too early. He slipped into the narrow strip of shadow that clung to the side of a fence, gliding toward the sound without breaking stride. His breathing slowed automatically. His muscles loosened to absorb impact if needed. Every part of him shifted into operational calm without conscious thought. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. His body was its own tool set, and his training had been built for moments exactly like this. The closer he got, the clearer the scene sharpened in his mind even before he laid eyes on it. He heard the woman's breath hitch in a way that told him someone was pressing on her throat. He recognized the strain in her exhale, the way the windpipe tightens under pressure. He heard one attacker grunt with irritation, frustrated that she wouldn't go limp. He heard the scrape of pavement under a shoe dragged sideways. He counted 2 attackers from the difference in weight and steps. One heavier, using force. One lighter, moving quicker and trying to adjust angles. Still unseen, he shifted positions, taking the longer arc for the better approach. He did not want to come up directly behind them. He wanted the angle that let him see their hands first. Hands always tell the truth. They reveal knives, weapons, grip strength, and intent. In silence, he moved across the small yard of a house, barely brushing the grass. He had closed half the distance in seconds. He finally caught partial sight of the scene through the gap between 2 fence posts. The men had pulled the woman into a strip of dimness between 2 houses. One held her wrist twisted behind her back. The other had his forearm across her throat, pressing her against the siding. Her knees bent as she fought to stay upright. She tried to stomp on one attacker's foot, but missed by inches. Every second counted now. Her oxygen window was shrinking. He could see it in the tightening of her shoulders and the weakening force of her struggling arm. He closed the last stretch with absolute silence. No warning, no shout, no hesitation. His body settled into the same state it always entered in high-stakes seconds. Calm, focused, cold enough to think clearly but warm enough to act with precision. Every detail of the environment, the placement of the attacker's legs, the angle of the woman's weight, the limited space between the houses, locked into place in his mind as he prepared to step out of the shadows. Breath control becomes the hidden advantage. The SEAL understood it instantly, long before the attackers realized they were no longer alone. Breath is more than air. It is timing, strategy, and survival. He had been trained to manage it under crushing pressure, underwater in full gear, in smoke-filled rooms, in moments when panic would make an untrained person inhale too fast and lose everything. He knew how to slow it, stretch it, weaponize it. In this narrow space between 2 houses, that skill clicked into place without effort. As he stepped forward, he took one slow inhale, steady enough to lower his pulse and sharpen his focus. His exhale was silent, a practiced release that let him move with complete control. The attackers didn't hear him. They were too wrapped in their own struggle, too busy trying to silence the woman who refused to collapse. The seal noted the position of her throat in the attacker's grip. He counted the seconds she had been held like that. He measured how much longer she had before her body forced a panic response. Most people start to fight harder when their airflow cuts, but their movements lose precision as fear takes over. Her motions were already shifting. Her strength was turning into desperation. He closed the remaining distance. The attacker holding her throat had his back angled toward the fence, his head forward, his weight over his right foot. The seal took another quiet inhale. His chest barely moved. What mattered was the mental clarity that came with it, the way his breath slowed the moment into a sequence. 1, 2, 3. The timing settled. Then he moved. He slipped behind the heavier attacker first, placing his body close enough to control him, but not close enough to be grabbed. He didn't strike right away. Instead, he used his breath to stay fluid. He exhaled as he drove his forearm across the attacker's elbow joint, a precise pressure that forced the arm away from the woman's throat. Her breath returned in a sharp rush. The attacker tried to turn, but the seal shifted his stance, taking another small inhale to maintain rhythm before applying a quick torque that destabilized the man's balance. The second attacker saw the movement too late. He let go of the woman's wrist and lunged toward the seal, expecting chaos. Instead, he met someone whose heartbeat barely rose above resting. The seal exhaled as he stepped sideways, redirecting the lunge with controlled force. Breath out, movement in. He grabbed the attacker's shirt to pivot him into the fence, using that exhale to keep the motion tight and efficient. The attacker hit the boards with a thud that knocked the rhythm out of him. The woman stumbled forward, coughing as air returned to her lungs in uneven bursts. The seal heard it, but didn't look at her yet. He knew she was in the window between collapse and recovery, where the body tries to stabilize after being denied oxygen. Her breath rasped, but it was coming back. She had a few seconds before dizziness caught up. He needed those seconds to end the threat. The heavier attacker tried to rise. The seal's inhale marked the next move. He dropped his weight, hooked the man's ankle with his foot, and swept his leg out from under him. The attacker hit the ground. The seal didn't waste the breath required for talking. Words only slow situations like this. Instead, he stepped over the man, planted a knee on his upper back, and used one sharp exhale to apply pressure that kept him pinned. The lighter attacker pushed off the fence and rushed again. His breathing was ragged, frantic, already burning through his energy. The seal didn't match that pace. He inhaled, centered himself, and shifted just enough to let the attacker's momentum carry him past. Then he exhaled and struck him across the jaw with the heel of his hand. It wasn't a wild hit. It was a clean, decisive movement delivered with the controlled power of someone who knew exactly how to use oxygen to fuel force without wasting it. The man dropped to one knee, stunned. The seal followed with a sweep to keep him down, his breath steady, his focus unbroken. He checked their hands quickly for weapons. Nothing. Good. But he didn't assume the fight was done. Breath isn't only for power. It is for awareness. His training taught him to scan even in the middle of impact. He listened for sirens, footsteps, doors opening. Nothing yet. The neighborhood remained caught in that fragile space after chaos, but before reaction. He turned his head slightly to check the woman. She leaned against the siding, one hand braced on her knee, pulling air in fast, but not dangerously fast. She was recovering on her own. He didn't rush to her. He knew better than to crowd someone who had just fought to breathe. He stayed between her and the attackers, his breathing still even, his stance still set, waiting for the next signal that told him the moment had fully shifted from assault to containment. A swift counter that shocks the attackers. They never saw it coming, not even in the seconds after the seal dropped both of them to the ground. People like them expect panic. They expect scrambling, shouting, flailing. They expect someone trying to run or someone frozen in place. They do not expect a man who moves with precision shaped by years of training and pressure. They do not expect someone who uses silence as a weapon. They do not expect a counterattack that unfolds calmly, cleanly, without wasted movement. And that is why the shock hits them harder than any strike could. The heavier attacker lay on the ground, trying to push himself up with one forearm. He shook his head as if that would clear the disorientation. His brain hadn't caught up to the fact that the situation had flipped. He had gone from controlling the scene to being flattened by someone he never heard approach. His mind raced through the same questions in a loop. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? How is he this fast? He struggled to stand, but his breathing was already ragged, his strength uncoordinated. The SEAL stepped toward him, not rushed, not aggressive, just steady. A presence that carried weight without raising a voice. The man tried to back away, but the narrow space between the houses left nowhere to go. He reached for the fence, thinking he could use it to pull himself up and regain some control. The SEAL read that intention instantly. He took one quiet step forward and nudged the attacker's arm off balance. The movement was small but decisive. The man dropped back to his knees. His eyes widened with the realization that the stranger was not guessing at his moves. He was reading them in real time. The second attacker sat against the fence, still trying to shake off the impact to his jaw. His breath came in sharp bursts, not from exertion but from disbelief. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and pushed himself upright. He looked at the SEAL with a mix of anger and confusion, unsure which one should guide him. He thought strength would help him reclaim the moment. He thought speed would. He thought the element of surprise was gone, but maybe aggression would fill the gap. He was wrong. He lunged again. The SEAL shifted his weight barely an inch to the left, enough to let the attacker's arm pass without making contact. It threw the man off balance. The SEAL used one hand to guide the momentum downward. No punch, no dramatic blow, just a redirect that placed the man on one knee with his arm pinned behind him. The simplicity is what stunned him. There was no struggle, no visible force. He felt controlled, dismantled, handled like someone who had never been in a real fight. The woman, still catching her breath, watched with disbelief of her own, not at the violence of the moment, but at the clarity of it. The SEAL didn't look wild or angry. His movements didn't show adrenaline or fear. Every step, every shift, every counter was exact. She could see the difference between someone fighting to escape and someone fighting with discipline. The attackers could see it too. The heavier man tried one last push, thinking that if both attackers moved at once they could overpower him. He nodded at the other man, as if sharing a silent plan. They rose together, shoulders squared, ready to rush. The SEAL saw it forming before either of them took a real step. His stance changed. Not wide, not threatening, just anchored. Enough to show that he was ready for whatever came next. The men charged. The SEAL let them commit to it. Once they crossed the point of no return, he acted. The first reached him with an extended arm, aiming for a grab. The SEAL caught the wrist, twisted it downward, and stepped into the man's center line. The force wasn't explosive. It was structured, mechanical, efficient. The attacker folded forward with a grunt. The second attacker swung from the right. The SEAL ducked just enough to make the swing cut through empty air. He planted a hand against the man's hip and used the angle to pivot him into the fence again. The attackers now understood they were not dealing with chance. They were dealing with someone whose reactions came from a playbook they didn't even know existed. Their shock deepened when they realized they could not predict anything he did. Every move was one step ahead. Every counter met their aggression with something cleaner and stronger. They stepped back, not to recalibrate, but because the instinct to continue had drained out of them. The woman was no longer the target. The moment was no longer theirs. Whatever plan they had prepared had collapsed in the span of seconds. Their breathing was frantic, their coordination broken, their confidence gone. They stared at the SEAL like he was a force that had materialized out of nowhere and erased their control before they understood what was happening. A street changed by 1 minute of precision. That is all it took. 60 seconds that broke the illusion of safety, reshaped the night, and rewired the way every person on that block would remember this place. Before the struggle, the street felt like a tucked-away corner of calm, a spot where porch lights glowed soft and familiar, a place where people let their guard down without thinking twice. But a single minute of real danger strips away layers that took years to build. And when someone steps in with precision sharp enough to end that danger, the environment shifts in a way no one forgets. The woman, still leaning against the siding, pulled in air that no longer felt routine. Her breaths were steadying, but the memory of losing them lingered like a bruise across her mind. Every inhale reminded her how close she had come to being dragged into a darkness that looked harmless from a distance. She stared at the seal, her voice caught between gratitude and shock. People imagine heroes arriving with noise and bright lights. They picture warnings shouted through the air. They expect dramatic declarations. Instead, she got a man who moved without a word, restored her breath in seconds, and left the night quieter than it had been before. The attackers lay on the ground, not unconscious but defeated. Their bodies stayed still because moving required a confidence they no longer had. The fight had drained out of them, replaced with fear shaped by the realization that every second of the encounter had been out of their control. They had picked a street they thought was predictable. They had chosen a target they believed would be easy. They had crafted a plan that relied on silence, darkness, and speed. What they never accounted for was someone with better silence, sharper awareness, and a level of speed that didn't come from desperation but training. The seal did not gloat. He didn't posture or pace or breathe hard like someone shaken by the moment. He simply checked the woman's stance, her ability to stand without support, her breathing pattern. He did it with one glance, a silent assessment that told him everything he needed. She was shaken, but stable. Her breaths were deeper now, less frantic. Her legs were steady. Her eyes were alert. Once he confirmed she could stay upright, he looked back to the attackers without shifting his calm. The neighborhood itself felt different. Windows that had been dark now held faint movements behind curtains. People who had trusted the quiet were beginning to sense that something had happened. A porch light clicked on. A shadow crossed a doorway. It was the moment between ignorance and awareness, when a community wakes up to the fact that danger had walked into their space without asking. And just as quickly, it had been stopped. The woman pressed a hand to her throat, not to nurse it, but to confirm that she still controlled it. She watched the seal as he stepped back just enough to give her space, while still positioning himself where he could block any final attempt from the attackers. He didn't ask if she was all right. Some questions answered themselves. He simply met her eyes long enough for her to understand she was safe now. Not by luck, but because someone with the right skill had been close enough to hear what no one else heard. The attackers shifted, one trying to sit up straighter, the other rubbing his jaw. Their breathing had settled into shallow patterns, the kind that come from fear rather than exhaustion. They had been exposed. Whatever confidence they brought with them had evaporated. They knew the police would be called. They knew running wasn't an option. They knew the stranger standing over them wasn't someone they wanted to test again. A neighbor finally opened a door. Another stepped onto a porch. A dog barked from somewhere across the street, sensing tension in the air. The street, once quiet to the point of invisibility, now held a charge that spread house to house. This wasn't a story that would stay small. It would travel. People would retell it in clipped sentences, then in longer ones, each time adding the detail that stood out most to them. The woman's breathlessness, the sudden movements, the silent man who stopped everything before the neighborhood even understood what had happened. The seal stayed still, not boasting, not explaining, simply waiting as the world around him caught up. In 60 seconds he had changed the outcome, the night, the memory of this place. Not with force alone, not with intimidation, but with precision so complete that it shifted the tone of the entire street. And as the neighbors stepped outside, their eyes adjusting to the dimness, they saw a truth they had never considered. All it takes is one person with the right skill in the right moment to turn a quiet block into the site of something that will never be forgotten.